Hi, welcome to the Bible Standard, where you are guaranteed in-depth Bible study and analysis. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop a comment in the comments area to have your say, and we'll do our best to reply.
There's a famous story about a man called Blaise Pascal, and you might have heard of him. He was a French mathematician. He was a physician, a physicist even, from the 1600s. And the unit of pressure, Pascal, is named after him. And because he was an important man in French society, he knew the King of France, King Louis. And one day, the king is said to have asked him for evidence about the supernatural. Why do you believe in miracles? The king asked Blaise Pascal, why do you believe in God? And famously, Pascal's immediate response to this question was, the Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews. Even in the 1600s, the story of the Jewish people was so unusual, so unique, so unprecedented that it convinced rational men, such as Blaise Pascal, that there was a good reason to believe in miracles. And this is the case that the Bible itself makes for us. Isaiah tells us, as we just read, that the Jewish people, God's people, are witnesses on God's behalf to the other nations. Now, we might find many different reasons for believing in a God, and no doubt many of them are valid. But ultimately, the Bible itself directs us to the evidence that God has provided, the survival of his people, the Jewish people. This is a story without parallel in human history, the longest exile ever endured by a people, the indestructibility of a tiny, persecuted, dispersed minority for millennia. The late rabbi of the Commonwealth, Jonathan Sacks, puts it like this. He says, many attempts have been made over the course of centuries to prove the existence of God. Theologians have argued on the basis of philosophy, and in some cases the natural sciences, such as the argument from design. Yet the Torah speaks of a different kind of proof altogether, the history of Israel. Note here, he specifically picks out the Torah. This is the first 5 books of Moses, the law. The truth is that all of the prophets speak and prophesy about the Jewish people. But what's incredible is that everything that we plan to look at this afternoon can be found in the first 5 books of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the first 5 books. The whole unlikely story of the Jewish people was told and prophesied before the Jewish people ever reached the land of Israel as a nation. One of the earliest codes of law in human civilization documents the whole story of the Jewish people. And so we have 2 aims for this afternoon. Firstly, for any newcomers to the Bible, the 7 wonders of Jewish history present a case both for the existence of the God of Israel and a case for the inspiration of the scriptures, the Bible. For those of us more familiar with scripture, I've no doubt that we've all cited the Jews as evidence for God's existence. And the purpose of this afternoon is to dig a little bit deeper and quantify exactly why it is that the Jewish people are such good evidence for God's existence. The more we think about it, the more we realize that it becomes a multi-layered miracle. There are many elements of the Jewish story that defy the odds of natural phenomena. So here are the 7 wonders of Jewish history that we want to think about this afternoon. 7 unlikely, perhaps miraculous elements of Jewish history, some of them unusual, most of them unique. All of them will be found in the Torah and in the prophets of Israel more widely, documented in the Bible. And the idea of the 7 wonders of history is not mine. I wish it was. They were subtitles taken from a man called Ken Spiro, who's a rabbi and a historian at an organization called Aish HaTorah. Now, the 7 wonders are firstly the eternity of the Jewish people. Secondly, the dispersion and exile of the Jewish people. Thirdly, anti-Semitism, a unique eternal hatred of one particular people. Fourthly, they were few in number, a constant minority in the world. 5th, a light to the nations. 6th, the land of Israel itself, its connection and interdependency with the Jewish people. And finally, the return of the Jewish people to their homeland, to the land of Israel. And hopefully what we'll find is that individually, each of these 7 wonders are reasons in themselves for belief in the God of Israel. But when we take them together, it makes the overall miracle of the Jewish people more incredible and more unlikely, to the end where, to my mind at least, we're left with something undeniable, that the Jewish story is miraculous. So let's think then about the first one. The Jewish people are eternal. What do we mean by this? Well, here's what the Torah, or the Bible, says. Firstly, in Leviticus, God says, I will not cast them off. I will not cast the Jewish people away. Even when they're in the land of their enemies, I will remember for their sakes the covenants of their ancestors. Even though they would be exiled, the Bible tells us at every point of Israel's history, God would never cast them away. And by definition, that means that this people would always exist. And Jeremiah is more emphatic about this. Yet will I not make a full end of thee, he promises to the Jewish people, even though he would make a full end of all other nations, whither I've scattered you. And there's a more emphatic one towards the end of Jeremiah. Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night, which divides the sea, when the waves thereof roar. Yahweh of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, if the things of the day and the night depart from before me, saith Yahweh, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. God says that the survival of the Jewish people is as certain as the sunrise, as certain as the ordinances by which Mother Nature operates. The Jews will always be there, just as the sun will rise in the morning, is the testimony of Jeremiah. One of the first references to Israel outside of the Bible is on the Meneptah stele. It's kind of interesting. The first reference to Israel outside of the Bible is actually an obituary. He describes how he conquered Israel. Pharaoh Meneptah says, Israel is wasted. His seed is no more. And this is kind of like, this is the small, insignificant people who I, the great Pharaoh, have destroyed, he says. Well, here is Pharaoh Meneptah today. He's not doing too bad for 3,000 years old because he was mummified. But here are the Jewish people today. They defy Pharaoh Meneptah's obituary. They should have been destroyed millennia ago, but here they are. It's kind of interesting because the second reference to Israel outside of the Bible is also an obituary. In the time of the kings of Israel during the Iron Age, the Moabite stone describes the obliteration of Israel in the days of King Ahab, who was a king of Israel. Now, sadly, I couldn't find a picture of King Mesha since he wasn't mummified, so I've used AI. Now, King Mesha is gone. Moab, the nation who he was a king of, is gone. But Israel, the same ethnicity, the same nation, the same religion, the same God, still exists today. This is what King Mesha said. As for Omri, who was the dad of King Ahab, as for Omri, king of Israel, he humbled Moab for many years, for Chemosh, that's the god of Moab, was angry with his land. His son followed him, King Ahab followed him, and he said, I will humble Moab. In my time he spoke thus, but I have triumphed over him and over his house, while Israel has perished forever. In fact, Israel had not perished forever. King Mesha has perished forever, along with the nation of Moab. In the 1900s, Leo Tolstoy said the Jew is the emblem of eternity. He says the Jew is as everlasting as eternity himself. And you've probably seen this quote. This is from a man called Mark Twain, who wrote about the Jews at the start of the 1900s. And I think the reason why this quote has become so famous is because of how amazingly it's written. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian rose and filled the planet with sound and splendor. All of these empires rose and fell. They held their torch high for a time, he said, and now they've vanished. The Jews saw them all and beat them all. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. Even early in the 1900s, before the Holocaust, Before the state of Israel, the indestructibility of the Jewish people was already miraculous. Now, according to scientists, I think that the oldest distinct people are the San people. They're found in various parts of South America and South Africa. They're from South Africa. And they're basically as old as human civilization itself. So here's the question. Why is it a miracle that the Jewish people have survived? We can point to other groups, the San people. They are just as old, probably older. The Aboriginals in Australia, similar. The Chinese, although they mostly survived because of their vast population. So the Jews aren't that original. Why would we try and sell this as a miracle? The difference is that the San people were located in a secluded part of South Africa and later South America. None of the big world empires cared about South Africa. The same is true for the Aboriginals in Australia. You can see how a population may maintain its distinctiveness when they are in such isolated areas. The eternity of the Jewish people is different. This is a famous conceptual map of the land of Israel. It's pictured as the center of the world. It's the land bridge that connected 3 continents together, Europa, Asia, and Africa. Any empire who wanted to dominate the region needs to pass through the land of Israel. This is why the history of the land of Israel is so turbulent. The Jewish people should have been squished at the bottom of about 10 different layers of civilization. And that's before you think about their survival outside the land of Israel. The real control groups to whom the Jews can be compared are people like the Philistines or the Jebusites, the Perizzites or the Hivites or the Amalekites, the Hittites or the Girgashites that the Bible talks about. All of them have disappeared without exception. The eternity of the Jewish people is unique in world history. It is a testament to a transcendent power, and their eternity was predicted in the Torah and the prophets. This wonder by itself is compelling evidence for a God. But of course, there is more evidence than this. The next wonder or miracle of the Jewish people is their dispersion. The Bible prophesied that Israel would be scattered into all different nations. So we find this throughout the Bible. For example, again in Deuteronomy, in the first 5 books, it says, Yahweh will scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth to the other. And we find the same earlier in Deuteronomy and in Ezekiel as well. They shall know that I am Yahweh when I shall scatter them among the nations and disperse them in the countries. And what's particularly interesting about this is the extent of the dispersion from one end of the earth to another. It's one thing to be fatalistic and to prophesy that your people will be defeated and scattered throughout the earth and yet still survive. It's another thing to predict that they will be scattered literally across the entire globe, scattered throughout all the earth and still survive. And this happened to the Jewish people more than once. Israel was scattered on many different occasions. They were migrated to Egypt for 200 years. This alone should have been the end of the Jewish people. They should have been assimilated into the Egyptian morass of population at the time. Assyria exiled the northern kingdom of Israel and purposely set out to destroy their identity. King Nebuchadnezzar deported the Judeans to Babylon and much further afield. The Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. They deported Jews as slaves and tried to erase all Jewish identity and connection to the land of Israel. But here's the question. How hard is it to survive an exile? Surely there are other examples of nations who survived similar exiles. Not really. Almost none. For example, in 1845, there was a devastating potato famine in Ireland, and this destroyed the Irish staple source of food, and many people died of starvation. And as a result, around 1 million people emigrated to the United States. Now, that was just over 150 years ago. If you were to go to America today and call all of the Irish community to return home, what would happen? Barely anyone would come. You might find the odd person with Irish heritage, maybe the very rare full family. The Irish people who emigrated to America have assimilated into American culture. And in a sense, they had it easy as well. All the time they were in America, they still had an Irish homeland, a central place of Irish culture. The Jews had no home. There is not a single nation on the planet that has survived 2 exiles, let alone when one of them was 2,000 years old, when all connection to their homeland was purposely erased. This is unthinkable. And this is before we realize that it was prophesied by multiple writers in the Bible. This wonder by itself is compelling evidence for the God of Israel. But again, there's more than just this. Not only have the Jewish people proved themselves to be eternal or indestructible, despite multiple exiles across multiple millennia, they have also survived despite a unique, special form of hatred that is only directed against them. Anti-Semitism. Now, people have suggested that there are 4 different characteristics of anti-Semitism, but just before we get there, I forgot about this slide. This slide is about anti-Semitism in the Bible. It describes kind of Jew hatred in biblical terms. For example, Ezekiel 35 talks about a perpetual hatred that would be between the Gentiles and the children of Israel. In this case, it was the Edomites. 1 Kings says that the Jewish people would become a proverb and a byword, something people would mock among all people. Ezekiel 25 talks about an old hatred. This is anti-Semitism. Deuteronomy 28, this is the Torah again, talks about an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword is what the Jewish people would become. This is the idea of anti-Semitism prophesied in Scripture. And we get examples of Jew hatred in the Bible. For example, Haman sought to destroy all of the Jews in the Empire of Persia. Or there's another example in Daniel chapter 3 where Jews are discriminated against for their form of worship. And there are several others as well. But it's been suggested that there are 4 characteristics of anti-Semitism that makes it unique. So firstly, its universality, so how widespread it is. Secondly, its intensity, the level of hate that's been directed against the Jewish people. Thirdly, its longevity. No hatred in the world has ever lasted this long. And fourthly, its irrationality, the total lack of logic to this hatred. Everyone hates the Jews for different reasons. There's no coherence to it. How do we know that anti-Semitism is universal? Well, the Jews have been kicked out of almost every country that they've come to settle in. This is a famous map that shows the fact that they've been expelled throughout all countries in Europe where they came to settle. And the same is true in the 20th century from much of the Arab world as well. What about its intensity? Well, an obvious example of the intensity of the hatred for the Jewish people is the Holocaust. This is what Winston Churchill said towards the end of the Second World War. He said, whole districts, speaking about the Holocaust, whole districts are being exterminated. Scores of thousands, literally scores of thousands of executions in cold blood are being perpetrated by the German police troops. And he says, we are in the presence of a crime without a name. Well, when he said that, this was given in a radio address, when he said that, a man was listening to that address, a man called Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jewish lawyer. And he developed a term to describe the Nazi systematic persecution. And the term was genocide. The hatred of the Jewish people was so intense and resulted in such crimes that new words were created in order to understand it. Genocide isn't the only example of this. The Jewish lexicon of tragedy includes things like expulsion, forced conversion, inquisition, autodafé, pogrom, ghetto, all words which originally applied to the Jewish people themselves. This is an intense hatred, an unusually intense hatred. What about its longevity? Martin Gilbert says that anti-Semitism has stood the test of time. He talks about the perpetual and irrational violence which pursued the Jews to every country and almost every corner of the globe. He was a Jewish historian who documented the history of his people. And he says he was surprised and depressed by the extent of this hatred across history. Anti-Semitism has stood the test of time. And finally, what about its irrationality? I won't read this quote, but it demonstrates that whatever your viewpoint, whether on the right or left of politics, there's always been a reason to hate the Jews, regardless of its rationality. If you're a communist, then you blame the Jewish capitalists. If you're a capitalist, then you blame the Jewish communists, and so on. The Jews have been given a strange, unique, ancient hatred to haunt them wherever they go, and they have still survived. And all of this was prophesied in the Bible. I would suggest that this wonder by itself is compelling evidence for a God in Israel. But of course, there's more. The Jewish people are few in number. They've survived as a minority. So the Bible says that when the Jews were scattered, they would also be few in number. It's one thing for people to survive thousands of years. It's another thing to do it as a tiny, persecuted minority. So this quote we quoted earlier, "The Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither the Lord shall lead you," says Deuteronomy 4, verse 27. So it's kind of interesting. In the 1st century AD, when the Jews were scattered by the Romans, there were 7 million Jews in the world then. Now today, there are only 14 million Jews. Over the course of 2,000 years, the Jewish population has doubled. That isn't very much. For example, if you were to compare this to the Chinese, they went from a population of 30 million in the 1st century to over 1 billion now. Given how long the Jewish people have been around, after the Chinese and the Indians, the 3rd largest ethnic group on the planet should be the Jews. Not only are they still tiny, their survival under these conditions is miraculous. How could such a tiny enclave of Jewish identity hold out against the vastness of the world? How were Jewish values and Jewish culture passed on in these circumstances for so long? How were they not swallowed up and assimilated? And the Bible predicted that they would survive few in number. This is miraculous. It's evidence for belief in a God. But there's more evidence than this, because not only are they small in number, they have also had a disproportionate effect on the course of the world. And this leads us to miracle or wonder number 5. The question is not just, how did the Jewish people survive? The question really is, how did they thrive to such a miraculous extent? How have they had such a huge impact on the course of world history? In Genesis, we read that through the Jewish people, all families of the earth would be a blessing. And ultimately, this is a prophecy about Jesus. But it's nonetheless true that the Jews have brought blessings to the lands where they've settled. Most importantly, they brought the values of the Word of God to the Gentiles. The Judeo-Christian values that have shaped the Western world originate through the Jewish people, and ultimately from the Bible. For example, the idea that humans are created in the image of God. That's a Jewish idea. It's an idea from the Bible, something that has changed the course of history. Seeking peace and not war. This was first idealized by the Jewish prophets from the Bible. All of the other nations of the time glorified ambition, strength, conquering, and the subjugation of other peoples, but not the Jewish people. They talk about beating the swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, farming implements. They visualize peace as an ideal. They're the first people ever to do that in the history of the world. And they brought that ideal to the world. Typically, throughout history, there have been two ways for a group of people to assert their views on the rest of the world. You could either conquer and subjugate other peoples, for example, as what Greece or Rome did, or you can create proselytes, such as what Christianity did, and Islam to a sense, although they were military as well. The Jews did neither of those, and yet they are the most influential people the world has ever known. But in the last 2,000 years, they haven't had an army, and the Jewish faith isn't really about conversion. Converts are few and far between. But 3 billion people in the world today believe in some form of monotheism, and that is a distinctly Jewish idea, originating for the first time in human civilization from the Torah. But even in a natural sense, their influence and impact is beyond belief. The Jews represent 0.2% of the world's population, but they've won 22% of all Nobel Prizes. They've won 25% of field medals, which is awarded to the brightest mathematician under age 40. They constitute 31% of the Forbes 400, a list of the world's wealthiest people. They've held the World Chess Championship title for 54% of the time since the late 1800s. They make up 21% of Ivy League university student bodies in America. They've won 50% of Pulitzer Prizes, which is a writing prize for nonfiction. 37% of Academy Award-winning directors have been Jewish. They've had a disproportionate impact on the history of the world. Even Time magazine's person of the 20th century was Albert Einstein, who was Jewish. We could spend the whole of this afternoon just listing their achievements. The blessings that the Jewish people have brought to the world are staggering, miraculous considering their size. This wonder by itself is compelling evidence for the God of Israel. But of course, there is still more. The sixth wonder, or miracle, is the land of Israel. More specifically, the interdependence between the Jewish people and their land. Not only are there extraordinary aspects of the Jewish people, even the land of Israel seems to defy the normal rules of nature. For example, the Bible describes the fertility and the beauty of the land of Israel. It talks about, in Deuteronomy, about a good land, a land of brooks, of water, of fountains, and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, and vines and fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. And as we look at history, we find that this was the case, that the land of Israel was a very fertile place. Josephus says the whole area is excellent for crops or pasturage. It's rich in trees of every kind, so that by its fertility it invites even those least inclined to work on the land. Even in the days of Josephus, the fertility of the land of Israel was notable. Few people would doubt the ancient beauty of the land of Israel. The strange thing is that after the Jews were exiled, the land became desolate. And this also was prophesied in the Bible. Leviticus says, "I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it." So the children of Israel would go into captivity, and the land would become desolate. And the new people who dwelt in the land, would scratch their heads and be like, why is it such a desolate place? The Jews found the land to be very fertile, and it remained that way for at least 1,000 years during their occupation of the land. And that's testified in the Bible and in history as well. Now, this land is the center of 3 continents. And the land had been rich and fertile, as we say, for 1,000 years by the time the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. How come, since then, no other people or nation came to make it flourish. Surely if there was any place that you'd want to make flourish, it would be a place like Israel, the center of three continents, the crossroads of continents. This is what one professor said in the 1800s. He said, until today, no people has succeeded in establishing national dominion in the land of Israel. No national unity or spirit of nationalism has acquired there. It talks about itinerant tribes that have settled there on lease as temporary residents. People concluded that the desolation and uninhabitability of the land was odd, even before the Jewish people returned. In the 1200s, this is what a man called Moses ben Nachman said about it. He was a rabbi. He's commonly known as Nachmanides. And this is what he said about the land of Israel. Similarly, he which stated here, your enemies that dwell therein shall be desolate in it, constitutes a good tiding, proclaiming that during all our exiles, he was Jewish, our land will not accept our enemies. This also is a great proof and assurance to us. Now that was true in 1200 AD, and it was true right up until the Jewish people returned to the land of Israel. Why did no one else cultivate this land? How did the Bible predict that it would lie desolate for so long? Could this be a fulfillment of Bible prophecy? Well, since the Jewish people have returned, the interdependency between the land and the people is being shown again. The Jews are back, and the land is beginning to blossom. Even this by itself is a miracle. Here are some date palm trees by the Dead Sea, or some vineyards in the mountains of Israel. The land is blooming again after thousands of years of lying desolate. Why? Because the Jewish people have returned. We've talked about 6 wonders or miracles of the Jewish people. Each of them individually should make us look to a transcendent being, the God of Israel, who revealed his purpose with his people so long ago. We can appreciate the miracle of Jewish people without even talking about their return to the land. We haven't even got to the greatest and most dramatic miracle of all. The first 6 wonders ask this question: how did a people survive for 20 centuries without a state, without a home, without a place where they could defend themselves? How did they sustain their identity when everywhere they were a minority? How did faith survive the massacres and the pogroms when Jews called and heaven seemed silent? They are the questions of the 20th century. But nowadays, the question is so much deeper. How could a people ravaged by centuries of persecution and hate, against all the odds, take up national independence again? How did they return to the land after 2,000 years of exile? There is no comparison with any other nation. There is no way to rationalize this. There is no way to minimize this. It transcends the natural existence of other nations. This is something else. And of course, the Bible prophesied this as well. This is a picture of Jewish soldiers taking Jerusalem in the 6-day war. Joel said, "For behold, in those days, and at that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem." Throughout all the prophets, one of the major themes is the restoration of Israel after their captivity. This would be a sign to the nations. This is what Jeremiah says: "Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off. Tell all the Gentiles, and say, He that scattered Israel will gather him, and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock." God was the one who scattered Israel, and he is the one who gathers them. In history, we can see both of these things happen. So emphatic are the prophets about the return of the exiles that for centuries it has led Bible students to recognize that this would one day happen. So this is a quotation from a man who wrote in 1644, long before there was even a sniff of Zionism. He said about the Jewish people, "Shall they return to Jerusalem again?" There is nothing more certain. The prophets do everywhere directly confirm it and beat upon it. This man was writing in 1644, 200 years before the Zionist movement even began. This is Bible prophecy being fulfilled. So let's summarize this then. It's a miracle that the Jewish people have survived as a distinct people for over 4,000 years, despite at least 4 unique exile experiences, despite a unique hatred directed only against them, with such intensity that multiple characters arose to exterminate this people. And they survived despite being a tiny minority, few in number in the lands where they were exiled to. And they didn't just survive, they flourished. They shaped Western civilization and likely further afield than that, whilst only being 0.2% of the population and hated across the political spectrum. And not only this, their land uniquely responded to them, as the Bible prophesied, and most miraculously of all, they returned after 2,000 years of exile. Now, all of that by itself makes you realize that the story of the Jewish people is hugely unusual in the history of the world. But the most miraculous thing is that the Bible predicted every step of this miracle, thousands of years before it happened, in multiple different passages. In fact, you can find the whole story in just the first 5 books. There is a God in Israel. There is a supernatural being protecting his people, working in the nations to bring about his purpose. In the words of the rabbi I quoted earlier, Jonathan Sacks, he says, Israel has taken a barren land and made it bloom again. It's taken an ancient language, the Hebrew of the Bible, and made it speak again. It's taken the West's oldest faith and made it young again. It's taken a tattered, shattered nation and made it live again. Israel is the country whose national anthem, Hatikva, means hope. Israel is the home of hope. Or alternatively, I think more powerfully, in the words of an atheist, the first prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, he said, in Israel, in order to be a realist, you have to believe in miracles. So what can we take away from looking at this? The Jewish people are a witness to God's existence. And if the Bible has predicted so much of their history, every step of the way, then why shouldn't we believe the other promises made in the Bible? That the Messiah of Israel, Jesus, is coming back to the land to restore again the kingdom to Israel. The prophets say that Jesus will turn ungodliness from Jacob, and that the Jewish people will recognize their Messiah. We also learn about how we, as Gentiles, can come and share in this great hope through baptism into Christ. All of these are discussions for another time. For today, let's recognize the miracle of the Jewish people. And more importantly, in fact, let's recognize the miracle of the Bible. This is no ordinary book. Let's resolve to open our Bibles and try to live by its teaching.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.